You're listening to Witch Wednesdays, a semi-weekly podcast source for all things witchcraft in the modern world. Join your host, Steph, on Wednesday mornings to chat about seasons, Sabbats, and all new witchcraft topics to help you make your life more magical.
Welcome back to Witch Wednesdays. I have a guest here with me today. So we are going to dive into our chat. And first, I am going to turn it over to her so she can introduce herself and let you know where you can find her online.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm Natalie Labriola. I am a tarot reader, astrologer, artist, and you can find me online at my website, which is Talis, that's TALIS.studio. And I am occasionally on Instagram at my name, which is just Natalie Labriola. And you can book a reading with me on my website or find out more about my writings or lectures, classes, that kind of thing. So most of the information is there on my website.
Awesome, fantastic. Thank you so much for being here today and for, chatting with me. And we are going to dive into your tarot book. But first, I would love to ask you where you got started on your journey with tarot, with astrology, with the occult in general. How was that? Did that stem from childhood, or where did we start on this path that led you to creating a book?
Yeah. Well, I think I was always a bit of a strange child in a certain way, I guess. I didn't find the tarot until my late 20s. And I think that, yeah, I think as a kid, I definitely had an interest in kind of mystery in general. I remember I had a ritual that I would do on my way to school when I was in elementary school. I would walk the few blocks to school, and the streets were planted with pine trees between my house and my school. And so there were always pine cones on the street, on the sidewalks. So I would kick a pine cone a few feet ahead of me and see which way it was pointing to figure out, am I going to have a good day if it's facing away from me? Is it going to be a bad day facing towards me? Or like a neutral day if it was facing to the side? So, I mean, that's just one kind of like little detail that I remember, but I feel like there was that desire from a young age to interact with something larger than myself in some way. I didn't have like language for what that was. It wasn't like a conscious sort of pursuit, but I think that desire for like a symbolic language or symbolic interaction was present from a young age. I also started a spy and mystery club around the same time. And so I was just kind of obsessed with mysteries and trying to sniff out local capers and solve them. And, got into a bit of a Wiccan phase when I was young. And growing up, my mom was definitely into, mediums and ghosts and things like that. So it was sort of in my environment in a way. But as a young adult, I focused on visual art. I made art and was involved in the art world for like most of my 20s and part of my 30s. And it wasn't until my late 20s where I had gotten increasingly more and more sick. I had been kind of struggling on and off for many years with just frequent colds and infections and just kind of always being drawn back to my bed with a cold. And it started happening with increasing frequency in my late 20s. And so I had to kind of stop what I was doing and stop a lot of the ways that or pause a lot of the things that I was doing in terms of making artwork, and the work I was doing. And I had to really prioritize my health. And so during that period, I got I finally found an immunologist who helped me figure out what was going on, and I started treatment for a primary immune deficiency. And then concurrently, I went on kind of an emotional and spiritual search, a search for healing in some way. And so it was during that period that I let go of a lot of things in my life that weren't really serving me anymore. And kind of stopped trying to make art in sort of the art world in quotes, switched my focus to making clothing that grew out of my art practice. But there was just a period of several years where I was using the tarot a lot, learning about it, learning about astrology, and just kind of going on a personal search, and felt like it was a really helpful companion for me during that time, and has remained a very helpful companion. But yeah, I would say that probably illness and illness kind of put me on this path initially, but it is not the reason that I continue doing it. And in that way, I'm grateful for, yeah, all of my experiences with various, health challenges and things, because I feel like it kind of brought me closer to my truer, more essential self in some way, which is, of course, I mean, always changing. It's not a fixed thing, but I would say that, yeah, I'm grateful for it in retrospect. But so that was sort of a long-winded answer to your question. But in a nutshell, that's kind of how I found myself here.
No, I love long-winded answers because I like to,
Yeah.
see where people came from and what their story is, especially when it
Hmm.
leads to then interacting with the world, I mean, online through writing, and like sharing your experiences and like deciding to, offer what you've learned to other people. I like
Hmm.
to think like where that came from. So what inspired
Yeah.
you then to like put that information into a book?
So I've always felt like writing was just something I'm naturally drawn towards, and felt like from a young age that was my most kind of instinctive outlet for self-expression, or and so writing has been something that I've done kind of throughout my life, not really on a professional level, but more of on a just personal level, or connected to my artwork occasionally. And I just felt like there was so much to explore with the tarot, and I really kind of enjoyed writing about my own life, but through the lens of these symbolic tools like tarot and astrology. And I just kind of felt the call to go deeper with it. And I was, yeah, lucky to kind of send a cold email to the publisher, John at Wooden Books, with a proposal for a book on tarot, and he was, receptive to it, and it just sort of it happened, in a way that I wasn't really expecting, but it's been a really great opportunity for me to kind of dive deeply into the tarot, into all the major arcana archetypes, and try to condense the information as much as possible, because it is a small book, but we tried to pack a lot in,
Yeah, I love the size of
as
the
much
book.
as
It's
we
really
could.
cute.
Yeah. Yeah,
I like cute little
it's
books like
great.
that. They're fun.
Yeah, it's easy to dip into, and to, you don't have to read it like in a linear fashion, obviously, and so it's nice for just referencing and reading a bit, coming back to it later, and it makes for that kind of reading experience, I think.
So who would be the ideal audience for this book? Would it be beginners, somebody that already knows tarot?
Yeah, I would say it's great for beginners because it tries to convey each of the 22 major arcana archetypes in a way that is layered but distilled. And so you're not being presented with an overwhelming amount of information. What we tried to do is just present interesting and essential information. And so it's a great place to start if you are curious about the tarot, if you know a little bit and you want to have a handy reference that you can turn to as you pull cards. I mean, of course, it's anyone at any level can use it, and I hope would find something in it. But yeah, it's great for people that are just getting started and want to know how do I even, what is a tarot spread? How do I pull a card for myself? Or want a little bit of historical information about where the tarot came from, or that kind of starting point of developing a tarot practice. I feel like you could get this book and start to feel a little bit equipped to do that.
And I do find that it's something in each book that I read, even if I'm familiar with tarot, because every, author, artist offers some little like insight or interpretation that I hadn't thought of. So like if a card keeps
Mhm.
coming up for me, like at some points in my life, it makes a lot of sense. And then at some points I'm like, what? This has nothing to do with anything going on. And I like look to these other interpretations. I'm like, oh, it could mean something completely different in this instance.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I read about the tarot all the time as well for that reason, because someone else's interpretation will spark something new or give me a different perspective on the card or help me see things in a different way. And yeah, I think the tarot is great for that generally, just kind of expanding your own mind and your own perceptions about your life or your own beliefs about what's happening. It's a great kind of point of reflection for, yeah, for seeing your own life in a new way, I think, and for building new kind of neural networks.
I think that that's something that's come up in my life with like reading tarot quite a bit is just like the changes over the years, especially of like how
Mm.
I used to read cards and like which cards would sort of apply to certain situations or like apply to like the same people in my life over and over
Mm.
again. And like now that's completely changed. So
Mm.
I love getting like that feedback from a deck and then also from guidebooks giving me like new information every time.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, and your associations with the cards and the meanings just kind of accrue and get more complex over time the longer you engage with the tarot. And yeah, for that reason, I also like working with like one or two decks pretty much exclusively when I do readings for myself or other people because I feel like attuned to it or I feel like it speaks to me in a way that I can hear and understand. And so I think that's part of it too, is finding decks that you can have a resonance with in some way.
Do you have any advice to give to beginners who might just be starting on tarot or just picking up your book for the first time of like where they can get started? Because like you said, it can be some books can offer a lot of information and it can start to muddy the waters very quickly.
Yeah, yeah. I know, and there's so much that you can learn about tarot, and there's always more learning you can do and always more reading you can do. But I would say if someone is beginning to want to develop a relationship with the tarot, I would say that it is less important to try and memorize all of the meanings and to use it more as a tool for just observing your own life and observing the kind of symbolic meaning that emerges as you start to use the tarot. So you can ask your deck a question and pull a card and kind of immediately get some gut feeling about what it's telling you or how it might be responding to your question. I would say definitely pay attention to those initial gut reactions that you have to your cards and, then go look it up if you want and see what it means in the book. But to really pay attention to what your gut is telling you, I think the tarot is a really amazing tool for connecting to your own intuition and to developing that in in a way that, at least for me, I felt like I was pretty disconnected from my intuition when I started using the tarot. And over time, just by virtue of using it and by virtue of connecting to the wisdom of it and connecting to life in this new way, it really helped me to reconnect to my intuition. And I think that's something that anyone can do if they want to. So I would keep that in mind as you're pulling the cards and keep that in mind as you're asking the deck questions. I would also say that finding the right question is really important. There's a big difference between trying to find the truest question that you have. It doesn't need to be profound, it just needs to be true, versus asking a question that isn't really getting to the heart of what you want to know or what you are searching for insight or clarity on. So I think working with your questions too is an important part of developing a tarot practice. Refining how you ask questions, trying to really tap into true questions, and then imagining that when you're pulling a card, I mean, of course, this can be different for everyone, but imagining that you're dialoguing with like the wisest part of yourself or your higher self or your guides. When I think about it that way, it helps me to refine the question and it helps me to kind of center myself. So, yeah, I don't think you need elaborate rituals if that's not your thing. You don't need to do a whole lot, but I think just trying to ground yourself, even if it's just for a few seconds before you pull a card, taking a few deep breaths and connecting to the truth of your question, I feel like that really sets you on a path to receive whatever it is that the tarot has to share with you. And then the other thing that I would suggest is really trying to cultivate an attitude of openness and detachment from the outcome of your question as much as possible. I mean, I know that's often a tall order, especially if we're coming to our decks with something that feels really important or really urgent. But I think that through using the tarot, that muscle just sort of starts to strengthen. That muscle of being detached, learning to loosen your grip a little bit on what it is you want to hear, or what it is you want to receive. I think that when we use the tarot to help us respond to life and to just meet life on its own terms, and rather than trying to control or predict ourselves out of a feeling or out of an experience, it can be a really amazing companion and guide. But I think those things these things are processes, and everyone will find their own relationship to it. But if I could tell myself something from when I first started using the tarot. Those are those are some of the things that I would focus on.
And speaking of being, detached from the outcome, do you have any thoughts or advice to offer to people who like maybe don't pick up the tarot because they have heard that there are quote unquote negative cards or like bad cards to get and they like don't want those to come up and ruin their day?
Yes. Yeah. I would say first of all that if you are not in the mood or the headspace to pull a card, to listen to that too, because there's been plenty of times where I have not consulted the tarot because I felt like it might contribute to some anxiety that I was feeling, or I felt like it was more important for me to just go through an experience and not pull cards around it. So there are definitely times where, you know, it's just as important to not pull a card as it is to, you know, develop that relationship with your deck. So there's that aspect of it. And then the other thing I would say is that if you imagine that you're kind of dialoguing with the wisest part of yourself, then any card that comes up is for your highest good in some sense. So I mean, I believe that the tarot is not malicious or malevolent or that there isn't a sort of negative force or energy that would be working counter to your best interests when you pull a card. I think there can be times where we pull a card and it is confronting or it brings up all kinds of feelings, and those are valid reactions. If you see the Tower card and that's not what you wanted to see, and sometimes that can be, that can bring up feelings, and that's part of it. But I would just try and keep in mind that the way that the tarot is working is for you and is for your own growth or your own highest good. And to just keep that in the back of your mind. And hopefully that would would help someone to be able to relax into it a little bit more.
I think that's that's good advice. There are times where I just don't pull the cards because
Yeah,
I kind of already know
right.
what they're like. I already like have the answer. Like I kind of know, and
Yeah,
like the cards are
yeah.
gonna. I already know the cards are gonna tell me to be patient, and I don't want to do that, so I'm just not gonna pull the cards. Like I already kind of know what's coming. Like I'm kind of down
Yeah,
for that.
right, right. Yeah, there's plenty of times
Yeah,
where,
yeah. I would say that's come up for me before. I'm like, I'm just not going to do that today because I know what
hmm,
they're gonna say.
yep. Yeah, you don't have to take their advice, take the tarot's advice, and I have often not taken it. Yeah.
What does your current tarot practice look like? Because you do read for other people. Are you still reading for yourself? Is it very often or not very often?
Yeah, I am. I pull cards for myself, I would say probably a couple times a month. There are periods where I'm pulling cards much more frequently, and times where I take a step back a bit more. But I tend to pull cards if I like pulling cards around astrological transits, especially. So, I'll pull cards for this eclipse that's happening tomorrow. Things like that, where if it's a moment that feels potent and I really want to go more deeply into it or I want to reflect on it, I also will pull cards just kind of, I guess, as needed if I feel like I need some time to self-reflect, and but it's not necessarily a daily practice for me. It was for many years, and I think that daily practice was also really helpful in terms of learning the cards and learning my deck and learning the language of tarot. And yeah, I still use it frequently, but yeah, not daily. Although I'm also just in a season of life where I have I have a daughter who just turned 1, and I don't have long quiet mornings anymore. So my deck is definitely still in my bedside table, but I've not had the yeah as much time for for the kind of tarot readings that I used to do for myself, which would involve journaling and all of that. But I mean, that's the great thing about tarot too, is that you can you can just take 5 minutes and pull a card if you want to. It can really be flexible and like adapt to your life. And so, yeah, in this moment in my life, it is usually a shorter tarot reading that I do for myself.
That's fair. A 1-year-old is a lot of
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I love that
Definitely.
you touched on the numerous things that you can do with tarot because sometimes we just think of it as like daily, weekly, monthly guidance, but it really can be
Mm.
a lot more than that. And there are a lot more ways to use that within your life. Like you mentioned, lining that up with what's going on astrologically, which can
Hmm.
be a lot of fun. But I know you've mentioned before all the different ways of, checking in with your relationships, checking in with what
Hmm.
the hell your dreams meant, the wild dreams
Yeah.
you had last night using tarot to figure that out. So are there a lot
Hmm.
more things that you can do than just daily guidance or just getting an answer to a specific question?
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned some of the ways that I like to use the tarot. Yeah. In conjunction with dreams. Just like what did this symbolize in my dream, or what did this represent, or what was like the deeper message of this dream? I feel like tarot and dreams speak a very similar language. They speak, in the language of archetypes and symbols. And so it just feels like a really intuitive fit that the tarot could help you think about your dreams, or kind of tap into that. I don't know if it's like tapping into that part of your psyche that is, which is where the dream originated. It's like the part of our brain that speaks in symbols. And so I feel like the tarot is a really good tool for contacting that part of ourselves. And so, yeah, it can kind of go back into that part of the psyche and pull things out. I like to use it in conjunction with creative work and with clients that are artists or do creative work of some kind, because I think similar to dreams, I think the place where art comes from is, the part of our psyche that thinks and relates in symbols and images. And so it can be really helpful for getting into a creative process or a creative problem or figuring out, the deeper meaning that you're trying to express through your work, or using it as a tool to help you investigate your own creative process or the creative process of someone else is a way that I really like to use the tarot. And yeah, it's really helpful, like you said, for relationship reflections, kind of looking at what do I need? What does this person need? What are my challenges? What are their challenges? How can we come together? Pulling cards for each party in a relationship, and then kind of joint questions as well. And trying to think if there are other kind of specific things that I like to do other than those things, and the timing it with astrological transits, which is definitely something I do with clients as well, using it in conjunction with either the birth chart So getting more information about what is this moon in Cancer in the third house? How is that showing up in this person's life? Or what is the challenge associated with this placement? What is a card of guidance around working through those challenges? Questions like that are helpful, I think, for understanding someone's birth chart or their transits a little bit more deeply. And then this is pretty practical, but just looking at, you know, if you're considering a few different paths or options or variables, pulling cards for a number of different avenues that you're potentially going to explore, and using the tarot as a point of reflection to see which path feels like it's in the best alignment with you. And then one other way that I like to use the tarot is you can kind of just take the major arcana and ask, what is the archetype within me right now that's seeking expression or that is seeking integration in some way? And just pulling a card and seeing which of the major arcana are present for you right now. Or if you feel strongly that you are in a Empress period, pulling other cards around that to say, how can I express this archetype more clearly? Or, using the cards to kind of pull out the archetypes that are alive within you and to bring them into greater consciousness. So those are some of the ways. But when I do readings for clients, I always tailor it to whatever is on their mind and whatever is most important for them to explore. So I don't tend to use a lot of preset spreads. I tend to just try and help the client to come up with the right questions and to follow their line of questioning or to follow their line of thinking, just to follow the conversation and to use the tarot to help us go more deeply into whatever the issue is that they're wanting to discuss. So I try to let it be pretty adaptable when I do readings for other people.
I like that because it allows their own intuition to help guide the questions as well. And so they're involved.
Exactly. I was just going to say, often what will happen is that a client might have an initial question, but then based off of the card that comes up or based off of just getting deeper into the conversation, we will discover a deeper question, or we will find a truer question, if that makes sense. So if I stick to a spread, there's less room for that to emerge, for that to happen. Whereas if we just kind of use the tarot in conjunction with the conversation, then new questions can emerge, and hopefully the right ones kind of come up over the course of a conversation because, sometimes people just need some time to get more comfortable or to feel into the energy of the reading. And so I think leaving room for that to happen is important for me.
Yeah, and I think that listeners will see when they go to check out your book that when in the description it specifically says, "Can a deck of cards really help you understand who you are?" And I think that's like such a great line for what comes up in your book and for what people are going to be able to learn, because it really can, and your practice, and whether they go for a consultation with somebody or whether they are just picking up the book and doing it for themselves, that really is a big part of it, is deeply understanding yourself.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's really the best way to use the tarot is for self-exploration and self-understanding. And, ultimately, I think that's where its power really lies and where it can be the most effective and helpful tool is for, yeah, looking within and reflecting it back to you.
Which is something, sometimes we don't want to do that.
Of course, of course.
But it really, it
Right.
is such great insight once you finally do.
Yeah, yeah. I know. Um, sometimes I've been asked to do readings at parties or things like that, and I have on occasion, but sometimes I'll be like, "Are you sure you want a tarot reading at your party?" Because it's it's kind of a deep and private conversation that happens. And, it might not be the right energy for this party, but yeah, yeah, it's an introspective and it's a very, yeah, reflective and introspective type of tool. Um, and yeah, you're not always in the mood for it,
But when you
but
are,
but when you are, it's there for you. Yeah.
I agree, and I try to, use most of my tools in my witchcraft practice for that, and like not try to, push against it. It's there when I'm ready.
Right, right, exactly, exactly.
Well, Natalie, thank you so much for being here today and offering all of your insight into tarot and the many uses that it has in your life and your practice. It was so much fun to chat and get all those stories.
Yeah, it was really nice to meet you and talk with you. Thank you again for having me on. And yeah, thanks so much. It
Of
was great
course.
to meet
And
you.
listeners, as always, I am going to have everything linked below and in the show notes over at witchwednesdays.com. So you can find Natalie. You can check out the book if you're interested in doing this for yourself. If you want to book a consultation, or Natalie has classes too. So there's a lot going on. All of that will
Mhm.
be linked below. So you can check that out. And let us know your feelings on the tarot, where you're at in your tarot practice journey, or if you are just going to get started on one after you listen to this episode. We would love to know. And that is everything that I have for you all this week. I will see you next week.
Need even more witchcraft in your life? Subscribe to Witch Wednesdays on Patreon and YouTube for all types of exclusive bonus content like spells, recipes, book reviews, and more, or even order personalized tarot readings and spells. Be sure to follow on Instagram at Witch Wednesdays Podcast. And you can find all these links and more at witchwednesdays.com.